Corbolic V2. This is a super safe and effective natural anabolic. Not only is this product going to help you increase protein synthesis, which basically means muscle recovery and growth, it also may inhibit myostatin, which is a protein in your body that is known to inhibit muscle growth. This is a complete natural anabolic that works through multiple different pathways, has multiple trademarked ingredients. If you are a natural athlete looking for that edge, Corbolic V2 is what you need. Get yourself some.
Okay, Steven, go. Intuitive eating.
What?
Uh-huh.
Oh, man. Okay. So way to way to just throw it on me,
I did. He was
unannounced.
ranting. So
I
well,
wasn't ranting. Okay.
it was
Okay.
intuitive.
I was ranting a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast, guys. Lifestyle side. So we were talking, Danica posed the question of, I guess, like, how do we or do we have the conversation about stepping away from macro counting or when it's not necessarily relevant to an individual? And then Stephen took a lot of deep breaths and launched
What?
intuitive eating. And then I interrupted him and hit record so that we didn't lose it. So
So,
ready to go.
like, here's the thing that I think people don't recognize. There are some, there are a few people out there that, like, sure, they can literally not have any real nutrition advice or education or know what the hell's going on, and they'll just pretty much maintain weight with whatever they eat, yada yada. Their hunger signaling is on point. But like everybody's like, oh, I want to get to this idea of intuitive eating. I just want to get to this idea of intuitive eating. And I'm like, well, most people can't actually just eat based on their hunger signaling out of nowhere. And this idea that like when is the point when you're going to be done tracking macros? Well, joke's on you. Like when you get to that point, it becomes like this innate thing where you look at a dish or a burger or a this or a that. You're like, oh, well, this is probably at least like this much protein. This is probably about this many calories, right? It's when you have so much experience with doing that stuff that you're just inherently looking at something and be like, yeah, this is probably about this much of my budget if I want to not be, way over on things to where I'm going to be gaining weight, and then making a decision based on that and working around that. So the answer is like you kind of the time when you can stop counting macros is when macros is so ingrained in you that you're or calories or this idea of intentional eating is so ingrained in you that you're doing it anyways to some degree.
But isn't that intuitive? That does not become intuitive. Maybe it's the word.
No,
Like
no, because
that doesn't.
because I don't like, and I gripe about the idea of intuitive eating and the wording of that, anyways, because the way that intuitive eating is presented is that you can simply eat to your hunger signaling and maintain weight. And I don't think for most people that's super realistic. You have to have some idea and say, let's throw this out. So just say sugar is addictive, right? So you want more sugar all the time if you're eating it. So say somebody that has a diet that's higher in sugars, and by the way, I'm not saying it is or it isn't right now. I'm saying for sake of argument, how is that person supposed to have the ability to eat intuitively? Because their intuition is that they want something that, if it is in fact addictive, is going to create this opportunity or this consistent overeating, and they're not going to maintain weight.
So maybe it's more intentional eating.
Well, okay.
100%.
It's actually both. I've looked up intuition, like for exactly what it says, right? And it says the ability to understand something without using conscious reasoning. And so I do think the experience of going from macro tracking and gathering that time and those reps and that experience and everything can lead to a place where then subconsciously you're not having to think about it. You can look at something and say, that looks right, that looks wrong, I should rebalance it and stuff like that. But it's going to take getting those reps in. And can people get there without that? Like Stephen was saying, like, or like Danica was saying, like, the way you brought it up, it sounds like maybe somebody who just never wants to go that route. I would like, you're still people are still doing it. It's just the method of measurement, I think, is what changes from plan to plan. And it's not one thing is like drastically different than the other, but whether we're doing a food scale or we're doing measuring cups or we're doing the same size plate and 1/3 of it each time, one way or another, that's being tracked. And so I think what a lot of people talk about, like what a lot of people actually want to get to is not feeling like they have to check in with the app all day long
Right.
and
Yeah.
having to deal with that. And I think that's something that a lot
Or the food scale even. Like I
right.
just don't want to have to put shit on the food scale for Christ's sake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't track macros. And the only, to be honest, I've done this for so long that like I don't need to, like I already, it's ingrained in me, like you have said, Stephen. But I don't even, like I already know the impact, even as a type 1 diabetic, of like some foods, and I can eyeball things. And I also have been able to be like, you know what? I feel as though I didn't have enough protein today, and like reference back and just intuitively like have that feeling. I don't know if that's like an intuitive feeling, but it feels like it is. And find, but also make conscious choices. So maybe it's being able to, I feel like intuitive eating just, maybe we need to look up the definition of exactly intuitive eating.
Yeah, so
Well, I mean, because
I
it's like
think,
a random
but
phrase.
even so, the definition can be great. I just think there's this huge misunderstanding of like how you get to that point and what that actually means.
And why
Because,
would you want to? Like, what would be the purpose of it for what is your purpose to get to that point for
right,
people?
because like if I said, hey, I really just want to get to the point where I can do intuitive spending,
Right.
right? Like, what is your
I
reaction to
too would
hearing
like
that?
to be there.
You know what I mean?
Well,
I
That's
would
that's
love
why I
to just
think
be
it
able to
should
do
just
intuitive
be
spending.
intentional. It should just be intentional eating or intentional spending or
But you
whatever
know,
you
the
want.
funny thing about all of this is that I feel like a vast majority of the population and like most people probably out like the people listening to this podcast are in this little world, right? So it's going to make sense to them. But I'm sure there's a ton of people that if you mentioned intuitive or intentional eating, like the first thing that's going to come to mind for them would be probably just the basics, right? Like the whole foods. I'm going to do that kind of stuff, eat the foods that we know are healthy. And they're not necessarily even thinking about the fact that like, oh, but don't add it up in your head. And I feel like that concept for at least how I see it, like came about strictly for those of us who have spent so much time using parameters and targets and coaches and things like that. And so, like, it's really only something to work on when you're pulling, like, when somebody's wanting to distance a little bit, like from that kind of stuff and needing a break more often.
So I think that that stuff comes from traditional nutritional advice. Like I don't know if you remember growing up. I remember growing up and going into the doctor's office, and it was always how to build your plate. This
Right.
much of your plate should be protein. This much of your plate, and so it was very simplistic. And the thing about that was that would control calorie intake, right? And so again, if you're creating every meal that you have. You're never going out to eat. Okay, maybe that's more realistic, but what happens the second when you have to get takeout or the only food that you have available is drive-through fast food? Like that's where the kink gets stuck, I think. That's where people have a hard time because those things not only just happen, sometimes life is busy, the kids need to get fed, everybody's screaming, you're like about to pass out because you're just tired and hungry. You're like, that's it. We're getting whatever's on the way. Wendy's, fresh, never frozen beef. I don't know why I like that. I do. Um, so Wendy's, if you want to sponsor the podcast, please let us know. I'm
No,
more than happy to wear the wig.
I can get down with
Um,
Frosty and fries for sure.
talk about how much I might even get in the dress. Uh, but like that is a reality of it. And I will say this too. I think that there is a reality, at least in our society, that you are supposed to go out to eat at restaurants. Like if you only make your meals at home, and I feel this sometimes too. Like I'm expected to
Hmm.
have us go out to eat for a date. Not that we couldn't go do something else or go to the movies, but like there's some expectation that like we're supposed to go out, and I have it in myself too. Like, so I think that there's this social impactor of that too that also throws this kind of, I think, wrench in the gears for a lot of people in their initial idea of what intuitive eating is. Because if you do that without direction, without intentionality, it is very easy to see what most people see, which is that scale just ticking up
Well,
month after month, year after year.
so I looked up intuitive eating and tried to find like a definition for that. And from Cedars Sinai, the way that they put it is that it's trusting your body to make food choices that feel good without judging yourself or the influence of diet culture. And that stresses me out a lot. Like, I feel like that opens so much room for interpretation and fucking around. And like Steven's saying, getting to a place where we're not going to find, I mean, choices that feel good for you. Like,
Ice cream, pizza, and
right, that
donuts,
means
and
so
Eggo
much.
waffles.
And
Well, yeah, but then I think they like definitely didn't word that right because it should have been like choices that fuel you well, like fuel your body well and don't fuck up your system.
that meet basic requirements for you to be
Or right.
right. Like and maybe this is just because we work with a lot of people and see this like firsthand with stuff, but like we all need more direction than just you should do what feels good. Like I would love to be in a world where we could just guide ourselves based off of that as our like only compass, but like we need a bit more parameters. And so
Mhm.
that's where intuitive eating, like if somebody brings it up, I don't even like to call it that. And I love getting to graduate clients to that point. Like it's so much fun. And we'll do it over time with like untracked days where maybe we start at home. And just like Stephen was talking about, like we start to make it where instead of you going out, because a lot of people, I think when you do untracked days, they'll immediately think like, it's
Go
time to
out.
go to that
Yeah.
restaurant. Like,
Yeah.
whatever they've been missing, like something. I know that's how I used to be with it when I first started using those. That meant I was getting pancakes on a Saturday morning. But I think if we if we're talking about somebody who has maybe tracked before and is trying to move towards that area of life, I like having them practice at home with, like Steven said, no food scale. Like, don't pull it out. Just make your same foods and just don't have something else help you measure. And then maybe we go to where we're not measuring and we're not tracking for that day or maybe a weekend and we start incorporating those. And then when we get to the place where like everything's maintaining, they're feeling really good because I'll watch it for a bit because I don't want things to suddenly start dropping like crazy because maybe they're erring on the side of caution when it comes to how much they're giving themselves. And so we'll spend some time, even without tracking, continuing to like talk about different strategies and things like that in our check-ins. And then once everything's super stable, it's like, you got this. And so it's definitely super exciting. And I love getting people to that place. But I also think that it's like, it takes more work than people think it does for it to work out well for a lot of people.
I would also say that you had mentioned like do what makes your body feel good. So I would even dig deeper and say, well, define feel good
Right.
because that's going to be different for a lot of people. When you have done this for an extended period of time, or say like you say you're on like a meal plan for an extended period of time and you haven't had like a big old slab of cake, that probably isn't going to make you feel good. Like there are probably, when you
Lies.
reintroduce that, not a lie. Did you
Dude,
just say lie?
yeah. Look,
Well,
I've dieted hard as shit. And you know what made me feel really
Steven,
good
let me
afterwards? A
finish my
giant slab of
sentence.
cake.
Let me finish my sentence. There are some things that my clients have been like, I went completely off, or I did something that's like what they have said, and I had some deep fried food and it didn't feel good. Like my stomach didn't feel good. So maybe it's also defining what feels good for you. And if a piece of cake after dieting hard feels good for Stephen, then that's his prerogative and he can have that feel good sensation.
Yeah. Well, so that brings up like I have people practice this whenever we can when we're paying attention to like macros and stuff like that, especially if they are learning how to track it. Or if they're coming from like a meal plan into something else like that, where maybe things have been more restricted. I have them really pay attention to like the foods that they have routinely, or if it's somebody who is like having wine routinely at night, that's like my favorite one where they'll say, oh, well, I just have like 1 or 2 glasses to like wind down. I'm like, okay, how is it like, is it actually working? Like, do you feel like your sleep actually improves because of that? Is it actually helping you relax? Or is it now just like a routine that we've kind of gotten into and it's not serving us as well? And I mean, I have to do the same thing with like some of the foods that I eat routinely, where I have to like, I'll have, a couple of days where maybe my stomach feels off or whatever, and then have to look at things and be like, oh shit, like this food is just not sitting well. It always happens around then or something. And so I think paying attention to that kind of stuff can be a big part of the whole, you know, and I like intentional better, where you're choosing foods that give you like the most bang for your buck, I like with stuff. And like whether that means the most, nutrition and it's going to keep you full and things like that. Or like I'm a huge believer in having the stuff that just makes you feel good that day. And that like I always call it like a little hug. Like you deserve the little food hugs that make you feel good. And so, but choose the ones that are actually worth it and not the ones that are like just available all the time.
Right, right. I know I've used this before in the past. I don't know if it was on this podcast or maybe a different one, but the dial method of like maybe you need to dial up tracking and keeping a good like look at all the food that you're taking in and macro counting and all of that. But sometimes you do need to dial it down if it's messing with your livelihood or if it's impacting your day-to-day responsibilities or tasks. So that would be another thing, because remember, sometimes I'm working with clients who are struggling significantly in those areas where the dial is like 1,000% and I need them to dial it down. So maybe it is also looking in and saying like, where does my dial need to be? Where would I like it to be? What is like livable? Like where is like a flow state for me? Because for some people that might be checking in on like tracking now and then, right? Like now and then they check in and they say, okay, Roger, like I knew I was behind on like hitting some protein or whatever that may be. For others, maybe it does work to constantly track. Like maybe that feels intuitive to them. Maybe that feels intentional in a positive way, right? But if it is impacting in a negative way and impacting your day-to-day tasks, then I would challenge people. Where do you feel in your most flow state when it comes to any fitness nutrition program?
All right, so you ready for me to fuck some shit up
Oh,
real
I
quick?
love curveballs.
Here we go.
Cool. So here's the deal. Like your what are we calling it? Not intentional, but whatever the word is for the eating thing that we're talking about, because my brain's not
Intuitive.
getting the
Intuitive.
intuitive eating. Think about this for me. Do you really think any of your eating is intuitive with any kind of diet culture that you've been exposed to over the years, like Vogue magazine women's diets with an egg and a glass of Chardonnay, or all of the marketing that comes up with how, fresh, never frozen beef might be a delicious option with a sweet baked potato? Um, we're back again. But like, so this entire idea of intuitive, of only listening to ourselves, like we are constantly battered with outside influences, and it's not just food, right? We are constantly being marketed to in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's the protein bars, maybe it's the shakes, maybe it's the this or that. But like, how good do you guys really think that our internal dialogue or measurement tool is on what's actually intuitive anyways? Because I can be like, oh man, I feel really low blood sugar and weak, I definitely need to eat. Like, okay, cool, my body's telling me I need to eat, I got it, like sweet. But there's a ton of that in between where it's like I could just be stressed out. I could have just seen some Wingstop commercials and those look delicious. And you know what I mean? Like there's so many other pieces of what comes into that intuitive eating, I think also that people take for granted and don't like factor that into the actual conversation of, all right, well, how do we go about making that work in a way to where the feelings actually match up with I'm going to maintain my weight healthily within a reasonable range for long extended periods of time without having to put in a bunch of extra effort.
Yeah. And I mean, so part of at least like this explanation, they bring up trying to separate your choices and yourself from diet culture, and that's like part of the point. And I I just I can't imagine how hard that must be in today's world. You know what I mean? Like with like social media and with so much that gets thrown at you and stuff. And so trying to truly separate as much as you can from that and have your choices not be influenced by it. I mean, I'll have consult calls where like I'll talk to people about like the good old like slim fast days and like being the slim fast generation where there was always a box of those like in the refrigerator, and every now and then, like my mom would hop on that diet, and it was like 3 cans of Slim Fast a day, and then you got like grilled chicken and broccoli or some shit. Like it was like nothing. And like that's ingrained from when I was a little kid. And I feel like those kinds of things just like stick with you. And so trying to completely separate yourself from that and your decisions, I feel like it would then be something where if somebody was going to dive into this to truly pursue it and say that they had accomplished intuitive eating, we're talking about a process that's going to involve like mental health and stuff, like experts with that, and probably helping to incorporate that a little bit. Because I feel like somebody who's pursuing this, I wouldn't think that like if you talk to somebody and you say, hey, does diet culture impact your life very much? And they're like, no, not at all. I don't think about it. And then you're like, okay, do you think you need to pursue intuitive eating? And they're probably gonna be like, I don't know, what's that? And so like if somebody is trying to pursue this, then I feel like that, kind of relates to the fact that they've definitely spent a good amount of time with like the influences and stuff. And so we're probably working to separate more than one thing from just the act of eating food and stuff.
Yeah, I do think that it's healthy to try now and then to be, well, maybe to even ask a little bit further, like to say, like if I said to somebody, because I have done this before, what would you want to have for dinner? Like, what are you in the mood for dinner? Like, what would you want to have? And if they rattle something off, me saying, why? Like, what influenced that decision? And because I do feel that maybe just becoming more in tuned with it, because there are, like, when I think of things, well, pregnancy is a wild thing too. Like, there were things that I definitely was craving or had like this intuitive feeling of like, you know what? I think I need some beef. Like, I think that that's what my body needs right now. And then getting lab work done and noticing that like I'm low or deficient in certain things, like, and being like, well, that's hilarious because this is exactly what my body was telling me. And I usually don't crave that so being more in tuned maybe is something that we could practice more, but it's very hard because I think that we miss out on being in tuned in like all of the external stimulation that's around us, that we just completely disregard being in tuned with ourselves at the expense of losing that intuition, right? So maybe, and you're right, we'd have to strip away a lot. Like for many people, a lot of years of stripping away kind of programs and being able to really dig deep and say, like, what does your body feel like right now?
Well,
Right.
food aversions during pregnancy are a weird thing too. I mean,
Totally.
from the outside at least.
Yeah, like that, but I do think that like I think that it does say something. Like when Christina can speak on this more. You got more babies than I do, but when there were a lot of things that I added into my diet that I also realized like, wow, like I was deficient in this. Like I didn't have this in my diet previously, and this is going to help to sustain life. Like I'm going to build a life. And so, and aversions as well. Like I was drinking so much Mio and like artificial stuff And I loved it. And I still think Mio's fantastic. But it made me want to vomit the second I like smelled it. And for
Okay.
some reason, that wasn't going to be best for my body at that point in time. So the aversions really, I think, are true too. I'm sure other people could think on this and be like, well, I'm sure there's going to be someone to throw something at me. I'm surprised,
But,
Steven.
but here's another thing though. Like I think, and you both as moms probably realize this very well, like that some of the things that are added into like normal American foods, like folate and whatever, like those are specifically in there to make sure that people are getting enough. And there's a lot of them, so like that's where maybe pregnant women get most of that even.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
That was what kept me like the fact that cereal was the only thing I could eat. I would wrap my head around the fact that I was eating a multivitamin because they really do put everything in there to try and help fill in the gaps. And for me, that was always like my first trimester. The only thing I could survive off of would be like cereal. And thank God for things like Fairlife milk and stuff like that because that would help get more protein in. But yeah, a cereal is the shit in that situation.
Yeah, because I mean, if you want to get down to it, I don't think our that we as humans are actually really that good. Maybe during pregnancy things change. I can't give you any sort of insight into that firsthand or realistically even secondhand, right? I can just say, but in general, like if you look at most Americans' diets, like we are pretty not great at saying we have a well-rounded diet that has plenty of micronutrient intake that feeds us and makes us feel well.
Right.
And if we had this natural inclination, well, we would probably be consuming a lot more fruits and vegetables, for example.
Right.
And
We'd have a fiber
we
intake.
yeah, we just don't. So the inclination obviously isn't there for a lot of things for the idea of I'm just going to eat naturally and
Mhm.
how I feel to the food choices that I decide I want and the other stuff. And I think a lot of that comes back to Shuggy make me hap.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
Shuggy's my little dopamine hit, dog. Um, so
I mean, that's why
what
we have
makes me
food
feel good.
scientists and stuff, right? That like learn that stuff so that they can make food that's specifically designed to make it more appetizing so that it'll go past your intuition and you'll continue to want it. And so we're up against a lot of things with that. And I think that's part of it too. Like a lot of the times when people talk about intuitive eating, they'll bring up like, but people used to do this and stuff like that. And say, oh yeah, but like the world is so different, like than how it used to be, you know? And so if somebody brings it up, and I know that's a goal of theirs, I like to try and get away from having a name to it at all. Because really, what they want to do is they just want to eat like a normal person. In their mind, they think, I'm going to go eat like a normal person, not realizing that the average normal person is probably not eating the way that they want to eat because they wouldn't maintain the physique that they've worked to get. Like that's something I had said to my husband years ago at one point where I was like, fuck, I just don't want to have to think so hard all the time. I just want to eat like a normal person. And he was like, no, you don't, because you don't want to look like a normal person. And I was like, you're right. Like, so I will make sure I get the protein in. And if we're going to work to a place where we want to maintain the body we're paying attention to things like beforehand and stuff, I think the best thing to try into, like, in my opinion, I just try to get them away from thinking about being involved in any sort of diet or any sort of phase of life. Like, we're not in a maintenance phase. We're not in between cutting phase. We're not on an intuitive eating diet or an intermittent, like we're not giving it a name at all. We're just fucking eating and we're just living life and we're doing things that we know make us feel good. But at that point, we've put in a lot of practice to try and narrow that down and make sure that we've got like the checks and balances in place so that we're not having to be hyper vigilant, because I think that's one of the things that makes me nervous too, is that like, if people go to switch over to it, they'll be like, well, I'm just gonna do a Whole30 and I'm gonna eat super clean and then I'm gonna intuitively eat on that. And it ends up like it just trades one thing for another. And so if it it's usually something I just try to reframe the conversation on a little bit to try and make sure we stay in a good place where it's not going to result in like a year or two of them being like, everything went off the rails when I wasn't paying attention to it. And now like we're starting over again and trying to get to where they feel comfortable.
Yeah. Well, maybe you brought up a good point. Like, I think it is important to pay attention. Not just think like, okay, body, where are you going to lead me to? Like, I think that it is important to have, that's a pretty powerful thing to be able to make those conscious choices, right? But I also think that it could be important to like think about being in tuned with yourself and then make that like conscious decision and knowing that you're making a conscious choice and like this is what it will lead to after you make that conscious choice. Like you have purpose behind your decisions that you're making.
I'm so
I
curious.
make terrible decisions. Like the history proves this to be true.
Don't.
Maybe not so much anymore, but many
This is
times
a
in my life.
conscious choice to make this bad decision.
I'm so curious, Danica, what made this one like pop to the top of your head when we were getting ready to chat today?
Yeah. I mean, so right now I have, as the mindset coach, I work with a lot of individuals that struggle with disordered eating and have past like negative diet experiences. And I have two right now that have struggled greatly with restrictive eating. And they're just so in the detail orientation of everything. And it becomes a trap. And they keep saying, I just wish I was more free. And that's their feeling. Like, I wish I was more free. I wish I was more intuitive. I wish I could like just eat how I want to eat. And I feel for them because I can see how diet culture or like being so regimented can sometimes trap us. And even though it becomes like a conscious choice that we're going to start something, I think sometimes given past stuff too, it can like really spiral into a place where like we completely lose sight of any intuition that we might have, and that overcomes our choices, and it isn't good. So like for me, working with a client that wants to gain that ability to be more in tune with their body because they want to feel more freeing or more like they have control over their choices as opposed to like an eating disorder having control over their choices. So I see it as like an area of growth for many people. Not to say that like, not that I like completely agree with like, oh, intuitive eating. I think intentional eating or being able to be in tune with your body and not be controlled by a separate entity. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
The
completely.
diet demon bar. I love
Yeah,
it.
because it's pretty scary when that happens. And even though people could say like, well, then just stop, then it's not that easy. So,
Those people are entrenched in that at that point, though, and because
oh,
like I think
right.
we experience this more because of who we work with and what we do, where people are hyper vigilant, and this like before I have ADHD on this, I've been thinking about it nonstop for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. How body dysmorphia and how you see yourself plays a big role in this as well. But we have people that are so hyper vigilant about their body composition, how they look, this XYZ, whatever, that they become just like focused on, okay, I have to stay here, and then trying to control everything and possibly even under eating. Because I think most of my people who I have to work with more so on the idea of intuitive eating or untracked stuff, my concern for them is that they're under eating,
Yeah.
typically, not that they're overeating.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that goes
And
along
that
kind of with the
too, like,
population.
so when I say yes, hold on, did I lose you? Can you guys still hear me?
I think we all just had a very awkward pause.
We did. I think there might be a lag. So sorry guys.
But now it's good. Now it's good. I do, so even with that, like if I think that about being able to like restrict themselves even more, they're not, then you have to kind of play with. It's wonderful to be in tuned and like have intuition, but when your intuition is not your own intuition or it's not a healthy intuition, then that's not okay. Like we need to challenge that a little bit and say, like I have been able to say to one of the clients, "Oh, that's such an interesting point that Ed brings up. I'd love to have more of a conversation with Ed, but I don't want to talk to Ed right now. I want to talk to you." Like, so Ed might be telling you that this is an intuition thing and you're not hungry right now. And that's wonderful that we're subscribing and like fantastic. Great for Ed for vocalizing all of his concerns or her concerns. But like, I need you to think, what would you, as like the healthy person that you are striving to be, what would that intuition be like? Or what would being in tune with those voices be like?
Yeah.
I like to think of it like when I still had the motorcycle and I would go out riding. I'd have all the good intentions, but like, yeah, I'm just gonna get out to where there's not a lot of cars, and maybe I'll push it a little bit. And then, as soon as you hit something, there's some open space, like, yo, I could totally pop a wheelie at 130 right now. And you're like, yeah, and you're like, wait a minute, Steven. Man, this is not the smart thing,
This is
guy.
not okay.
That's my inside voice. It's inside my head. My meds.
Yeah.
So if everybody's like, Steven, you're wild today. Well, we tried to switch my meds because I could never get the ones that I need. So I'm on a different new med and it works for shit. If you can't tell.
It doesn't work.
He's he's not loving it today.
Mm.
I think we keep kind of circling back to like we're saying the same things just in different ways with it, where I think that generally there's like a pretty specific population of people who are interested in things like intuitive eating and who are going to call it that and pursue it that way, and who would probably benefit, I'd say like 9 times out of 10, with a lengthy reverse diet where they're getting to a place where truly food has become, for the most part, something they actually don't have to think about. Like where they have enough macros that like hunger signals are like appropriately there and stuff, but then they know how to build their plate and just think about like, I need lean protein, I need this or that, and be able to identify those holes. And then once they've gotten to a great place with that kind of stuff, then it's time to start playing with a little bit more and like more of that freedom that they're craving with stuff. Because the under eating and the erring on the side of caution, I've seen tends to be more of the like fallback immediately, where maybe they have one day that they feel like went out of control. Maybe they actually ate or ordered intuitively and like didn't get the grilled chicken and potato, and they were like, you know what, I'm getting the pasta. And then the next day they're guilty because they ate pasta and they're uncomfortable about it, and so then now their intuition is telling them they don't need to eat that much that day, that they can just eat as little as possible to make up for it. And then you start to see these like roller coaster moments again. And that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, wait, it didn't work. We need to go back to the drawing board and gain a bit more like resiliency in those situations where we don't revert back to trying to control it.
So I feel like you have to practice that beforehand. And
Mhm.
so I think a lot of maybe we have this I know for me, there are plenty of people that I have this expectation of. Like I have some clients that are maintaining their weight on like 600 plus carbs and 80 to 100 fats a day. And they're like, man, I really want a burger. I was like, well, then why the fuck aren't you having a burger? You have all the room in the world to go out and have a burger in your food numbers. So like, why aren't you having a burger? And they're like, oh, well, I mean, I'm hitting macros. I was like, so do it with a burger and fries if that's what you want, you
Right.
know? And I think people are also still afraid, like, to be able to incorporate those things in, because you can still do that with macros and hitting ma numbers. Doesn't mean you should probably do it every single day, but like, if you don't work on that experience, that ability to be like, okay, oh, well, I had a burger and it fit my numbers, and I don't have to feel naughty or bad about it. And now I'm happy because I got my burger and fries, and I don't feel like I'm, not able to eat the things that I want to eat. Oh, cool. Like getting that experience and desensitizing them to like the good food, bad food thing. And it's so weird because I mean, I feel like for the first 5 years, 6 years of my career, it was all about getting away from the idea of good food, bad food, right? Food is just food. It is calories. And now people got so far into that that they're like, oh, well, fuck, then I'm just going to eat pop, right? And IFYM got Pop Tart crazy and all the rest of the stuff. You're like, well, not quite to that one. It's in the middle. And so now we're going back towards, okay, well, we got to eat, you want to eat nutrient dense food most of the time. You want good micronutrients. You want this stuff. But if you do it all the time, then you're going to go back on the other thing. And so it's like this revolving door that we always talk about, like, just wait, keto's going to be next again. I know. And so now we're going back into the you can't eat crap foods all the time, but you can still eat more processed foods and things that aren't as quote unquote healthy for you all the time. And you can still have those things in and still have a healthy diet. Ah!
Yeah, yeah. I feel like a lot of people too just need a little tiny tad bit of like exposure to things, realizing that like just because you expose yourself to something doesn't mean that like that's the path that you're stuck on. Like you can also expose yourself and be like, just kidding, and then like go back. Why is that funny?
You mean
Danica, you're over here talking about exposing yourself. Like Christ, how am I supposed to? I'm not mature enough for this.
Well, I say that because sometimes I think when people are like, I don't, but I really want to do this, but I don't know if I should do this and da da da. And they get so wrapped up in like having an argument with themselves where I'm like, hey, why don't you try it? See what happens, gather that data, and then listen, you don't have to repeat it. Like, you don't have to go that way if it doesn't work for you. If like you try, I have some of my clients like, just do, I call it a mindful eating day. I don't want you to pick up your app. I don't want you to measure anything. Just have a mindful eating day. And whatever that means for you, that feels good in your soul and also helps you to be the athlete that you are striving to be, that's what I want you to do. And that doesn't mean that like just because you have that day, you have to do it the next day and the next day and the next day. Like you can try it, see what happens, gather the information, reflect, and then either continue to apply it or not. Like I think sometimes we get nervous that like, oh my gosh, but if I do this, then that's it. Then like that's the path I'm going to be on for the rest of my life. And I'm like, no, you can turn around anytime you want.
Everybody's afraid to make a mistake, like in their mind, because in their mind, like, oh, well, if I eat a cake, like I effed up, I made a mistake. It goes back to like kind of that all or nothing thing,
yeah.
which
Yeah.
is weird because if we're trying to do intuitive eating, like how can it be all or nothing? It has to be a little bit of everything at at that point, and people have a hard time with that. And they don't, and again, they don't recognize the outside influence that have on like, oh man, like I was really watching my favorite fitness influencer a lot, and lo and behold, I'm just not eating as much food anymore. Or lo and behold, I just don't I don't find the same happiness when I look at myself in the mirror. You're like, hmm,
Yeah.
really now? And it's
Yeah.
like for us, and don't get me wrong, same, like it can happen to me too, but like being able to recognize that in this idea of intuitive eating, you have to be so in touch with like kind of where your head's at and almost so removed from having emotion attached to outside influences on those things
Yeah.
that to like really be set up for success with it.
I mean, I'd say it's like a very advanced skill in this like realm of stuff, right? Like it's not something I would try to rush somebody directly to. I think it's something that there's like a lot more pieces to the puzzle. And that's where like if somebody's going to really benefit from it, they have to be open to exploring a lot more than simply not wanting to open up my fitness pal anymore. And like there's going to be areas of life that you have to inherently keep control over and just try not to like try to make it more part of your day with stuff. And then there's other things you try to let go of it. But the idea, I just feel like the reality of with anything really to just be completely thoughtless about something and hope it's going to work out well. I mean, I can't think of a ton of areas in life that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
like to
Well,
just be like,
yeah, that's
and so there's always going to be some level that goes into it. And I think where people can run into problems is that they do want to go to a place where they're not adding it up and they're not thinking about it at all when it comes to stuff, and then it bites them in the ass. And then we have to start the process over again. And so I think the smart way to do it would be with like help with like how you can counsel people through the mental health side of things and the mindset and trying to work on that. And then also moving through, figuring out what are they going to do forever, like exercise wise, that they enjoy. That's something where they're not necessarily trying to change their body. They just enjoy that kind of movement and it brings them happiness. And like having a full circle approach to it and being able to put all of that together. That's when it's like, when you get the buy-in on all of that and those things are all pretty easy. And it doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. There's still
right.
going to be days that you just feel like shit about it, or that like you do just end up or down or whatever. But I think what says the most about whether or not somebody's ready for that, and if they're ready to keep going with it, is how they respond to those moments, and their like reflection on it and their comfort with it will help guide like how they're going to do moving on from there.
Right. Yeah. I have people who are, well, actually, all my clients have to do this. I have a wellness vision that I like for them to fill out for themselves. So when we meet, I always have them take at least a week or two to think about a wellness vision. And in that wellness vision, you can include aesthetics if you want or athletic performance, but it also includes like, what does wellness mean for you and how does that look like, sound like, feel like, smell like, taste like, and going through everything. And then we reference that often. Like if this is your wellness vision for yourself, are we building the habits to get you to your wellness vision?
I would say what I find to be the most abundant trait of people who are going to do well with it and handle it well are individuals who have very low emotional investment in their food and their diet overall. The
Yeah.
more emotional investment they have in that, I think the more difficult of a time people have with that. Um, and so for me, I would say the people who do the best with it are the ones who just care the least typically. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna do it there because X, Y, and Z. So it's the other things that they care about that keep them accountable and keep them, within reasonable range and distance. Um, Not the actual food or the diet itself. Like, oh, you know what? No, I really want to make sure that I can focus at work and that I have good energy throughout the day, right? I want to make sure that I'm mentally acute. Cool. If I know when I don't eat breakfast or I don't have this meal or have XYZ that gets impacted, well then I'm gonna make sure that I have those meals because the other thing's important to me. I want to make sure that I'm performing well at sport, whatever. Okay, well I know that if I don't get enough food, then I'm not gonna have energy. I feel weak or I don't perform well, yada yada yada. So I'm going to just make sure that I'm doing the right things so that I can do that up to the standard that I want, like those kind of things.
Mhm.
Right. Like looking at all of your importance list or your priority list and making sure that like you're putting energy into that as opposed to just putting energy into MyFitnessPal or whatever other tracker.
And
Yeah.
I feel like what we talked about last week, like actually ties in really well with a lot of this. And like last week, we were saying, what can people do to kick off, um, like getting to their best physique, getting to where they want to be. And we talked about like the basics of like going for leaner proteins, like searching those out routinely. We talked about like produce and stuff, like basic eating things. We talked about exercising like a reasonable amount that you can recover from, but you can also challenge yourself with. There was a third one that I can't think of. Um, but we talked about that kind of stuff. And a lot of that is the same thing. If you want to run off into the sunset and not have to think about this anymore, those things are locked in. It's just a habit to have a protein shake nearby. Shit, I got two of them. Like it becomes like if I haven't worked out for a couple of days, I am like antsy, like a child. Like I need to go and do it. My body's going to tell me you need to get outside and go move. And like so you develop those and then you just keep them. Like that's really the overarching thing that I think most people would benefit from. I know like Paul says this all the time in like his videos and stuff like that, where like the way he sees it is the US doesn't have a problem with losing weight. They have a problem with keeping it off, right? Like we have an entire like giant industry devoted to losing weight. So we can help people get it off. It's whether or not they can keep it that way.
Right.
And I think a lot of it is because we need to get to like, yes, we want to get where it's easy because so many other things in life just fucking aren't. And there's an app for everything and there's a million things pulling your focus. And it gets to the place where like, I totally get it. You just want to be like, that's the last thing I want to have to do math for or prep for or like think more. But if you get to a place where you've laid this foundation of the stuff that got you started and then you just never give up on it. Like, you know, you let vacations and illness and stuff like that happen. But for the vast majority, you commit that you are the kind of person who does that shit day in and day out and you keep it up. And that's going to keep you from like the peaks and valleys and things like that. And it's going to keep you nice and even keeled and make it easier to have that runway to choose where you want to go next. Like we get back to the dial, right? I would say that's like the mid-level dial where like naturally you're just in a chill spot. You've maybe turned off the tracking in MyFitnessPal and maybe you're not using your like so when I was not tracking for like 6 months last year, I would still use my food scale for things like protein just to and I knew like roughly I could eyeball it, but I liked to just make sure I knew I got a certain number of ounces. And so like whatever it is where you've gotten yourself to the place where you're just thinking about it at a super comfortable level, you're going to have all these other things going on and then you're good to go.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, so well, do we have time? Do you have to go get your kids yet?
Oh, we have a snow day today, so my kids are here.
All right. So I think one other thing to talk about with this that's also a mental thing that again people don't think about, like if you suck at stress management, you are not ready for the idea of intuitive eating.
Word.
And I don't think people give that enough weight or stress that enough because that they don't like none of us like to I think admit that like hey if I'm stressed out I want the thing that's more calorie dense because it's going to give me that dopamine hit a lot better, right? And so normally again people that are less emotionally involved and attached to it, people who are really good at managing their stress also tend to be very successful at being better intuitive eaters
Yeah.
because they don't have that constant up and down of I'm really stressed out. I'm not stressed out at all and nothing matters and like they're not on that roller coaster and so things stay a lot more consistent with their hunger signaling and or for some people like we talked about earlier their lack of hunger signaling that comes with stress.
Right, right. I would say also being able to tap into like your, which is right next to, or if not in stress management, but your emotional regulation skills and being able to note your emotion and also in order for you to have that like mid dial range, I would say, or that flow state, you have to look at the environment that you're in. If you meaning what are all of the stressors or all of the variables that are involved in the environment, right? If you want that middle, it can't just be like, I'm just going to go to this middle point. Like, I'm just going to be in a flow state. Like, you have to be able to look at all the other things that might tick up that dial a little lower or tick it up a little higher. And being able to say, well, this is my cue or this is a trigger of mine that doesn't allow me to be or disrupts that like midline. So, how can I better regulate this cue, trigger, whatever stressor that may be in a different way? So reflection of habits, right? In order to break some things that don't serve us well and then get to that better place of the midline flow. So emotionally regulating. And some people, like you said, stress may cause them not to want food, right? Like not, I know when I'm stressed, like I don't drink my water. I don't like the basic stuff that I need. I'm like, meh, I don't really care. Like, because I'm hyper focused on whatever the stressor is, I lose sight of all the other stuff. So for me, I know that about myself. So one is awareness, but then two would be like, do I like what I'm now aware of? Do I like that? Is it benefiting me? And what changes could I make to better it as a whole? So that is really important too if you're striving for that middle line.
Indeed. I feel
Christine's
like
just like word dog.
so what's funny is where I was like, let's, talk about some of the stuff we haven't talked about in a while. Maybe get back to like the basics of like coaching and stuff. And my thoughts had been like maybe take a small step away from like our really intense focus that we've had on like the mental health side of things, just to get back to some of the basics that we hadn't talked about in a while.
My
But
bad.
no. Here's the thing. The thing when we all start talking about this stuff, right? And because it's so important to us, the way that we coach and the things that we want for our clients and everything, we can't tackle it without it going there because we recognize just how tied up everything is and how it all works together if you want to have somebody truly find success with stuff. And I think that if we look at our clients who have been the most successful and when we have personally felt the most successful and stuff like that, it's not because everything was super easy and we were just like floating along without anything. It's more that we like when we felt like we were walking into a situation well equipped, when we were able to be like, oh, this went wrong, I'll do this instead. And just like really easy, be able to do that kind of stuff. And it's so important. And so it's just funny to me that when I do, because this happened last week when I was like, let's talk about the basics of how to enter into like fat loss or muscle building. And I was thinking we were just going to stick to the like the very base and we fell down a mental health hole because they really are just so very linked together. And I think that a lot of people like to think that if they tackle if they tackle what they see in the mirror, they're like, everything else will be easier. Like, then I'll like myself more. I'll trust myself more. I will make better decisions at work and in relationships if I can just get to a place where I've lost 15 pounds. And they like, it's like, I'll just put my focus there and work really hard. And along the way, like, yes, if hit your goal, then we've probably gained some of those skills that are going to help us in other areas of life. That's what I love about the gym and like things like that is that you can totally expand it to your day. But you have to want to do that is the thing. You have to look for that connection and celebrate that, right? So like today, I had texted Steven from the gym because I was like, I'm at the gym and I have no headphones and my ADHD is like going through the roof and I can't focus on shit. And I was very frustrated. And I had to do a 6 mile. Well, I didn't have to. I chose to. I got to the gym, realized I didn't have my headphones. I needed to do a 2 hour block of work. I had to do leg day and I had to do a 6 mile run because it's already Thursday and I'm running out of time. And I had to do it without headphones. And so I like threw a little temper tantrum and was very frustrated and then was like, I'm just going to start and I'll see how long I can get by on this treadmill listening to the fitness class behind me where the guy just drives me up the wall. And like, oh, it's the worst. And it just, I fell into like a different rhythm and I took the time to like think about it where I was like, there are definitely other things in my days that are like equally as annoying that I would just deal with. And I was about to just turn around and grab Claire and go home because it wasn't exactly the way I wanted it to be. And then I was like, if I had to sit at the DMV for an hour, I wouldn't leave because I didn't have my headphones. I'd have to suck it up and do it. So I was do the same thing on the treadmill. And like, but even for me, like that's something I have to put very conscious effort to try and see like the light of that stuff and to try and flip it around so that it becomes a skill that I've absorbed as opposed to like that shitty day that I'm just pissed off about. And the next time one kind of starts that way, I'm going to get in a bad mood right away. And so like we have to learn how to flip it and we have to look at our experiences and the things that I love to tell my clients, go purposely kick your own ass. If everything else is hard right now, go into the gym and like purposely kick your own ass. Take back control over your day. Go in there and have a really good workout and then walk out feeling stronger because you put yourself through that. And I think that that can just be really powerful for like keeping us going.
I mean, I think so. There are a couple things that like were going through my brain, and one is like this idea in grappling that the body's going to move to some degree where the head goes, right? Like if I have somebody pinned down and I have their face just pinned facing away from me, they're not going to be able to turn into me. No, because I'm forcing them to look the other way. And I think that the DMV thing is a nice example because there are so many things that we didn't have the option, so we just did what there was. Like you go back 70 years, the food system in the US and what was available and what you ate and how it was made and all, they were different. And so was work. Work was different. It was much more active. And so people probably used to get away with stuff like intuitive eating because it was just set up to where it was easier. There's a lot more choices now. There's a lot more things for our attention to be drawn to now. And I think that is why when everybody's like, well, I just want it to be easy. Like, look, dude, the state of the world and society, it's not going to be super easy. Even if you're really good at it, it's probably not going to be that easy because there are so many choices and so many factors now that have changed how we think, how we view things like food, exercise, and a lot of those things inherently in society and like how our day to day goes. Because I'm at a desk all the time. Could I eat more if I was still waiting tables or if I was doing landscaping or cleaning out foreclosed homes still? Fuck yeah, you bet your ass I could. But you know what? Once I stopped doing that stuff and I was behind a desk, now it takes more effort. I have to be more diligent and intentional now about what my food looks like. Otherwise, guess what? It's going to be easy for me to probably put on some extra weight. And I think that is where the real true disconnect in the end comes from, is we want this idea of intuitive eating and maintaining weight or keeping weight off to be easy and to be, I won't even say low, but no effort. And
Right.
it's just, that's not realistic.
Yeah.
No, we talked about this 2 episodes ago, I think, or about frustration tolerance. And when people say to me, well, this is going to be a little hard, I'm like, good, good. You probably should be able to have challenge. And if it's important to you, then like that challenge went down a few notches right away. If you like really think about it and like this is important to me, then what is important is better or more than the actual challenge facing you in front. Like you can persevere that and also reflect like if it wasn't hard, then we probably wouldn't have this podcast or we wouldn't have a job. Like it needs, and also I think it's become more difficult in society today with everything that's going on with diet culture and just a lot of influence. But there should be a degree of challenge that comes with the great things in life.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that like to me, I can't see wanting to live like an unchallenged life, like at least one way or another, and I think that's something I had to like learn to love with stuff, but I think it makes it so much more fun when you get to the good stuff if you had to work for it a little bit.
And I think that you have to expose yourself to that in order to learn that. Like,
Right.
or to see that that actually could be something that is appealing.
Yeah.
You have to kind of go through it and then be like, oh, actually, that was kind of fun. Like that, I learned so much from that. I've gained so much from that. And give me a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's quite a privilege to be able to choose the what hard things or what challenges that we want to be able to take on because
Yeah.
not everybody's has that same ability. And I do think that this is lost in the mix to some degree for a lot of people too, where it's like, if I only have so much bandwidth and there are a lot of things that like take that bandwidth for me to keep my head above water, then it's probably going to be pretty difficult for me to make a big impact there. I don't have the energy systems available to do so. I have to try and figure out how I can shift those things and work to where I have that. But like for a lot of people, like we have that available energy, that available, you know, bandwidth to make those things happen and to choose those challenges that are going to help us to be closer to where we want to be with things like fitness goals or strength or sports and the rest of the stuff.
Yeah. I said to Matt this morning, because I feel like I haven't been tending to my athletic self at all. So like I've been exposed to some, like I took a spin class, I did rock climbing, and I did yoga. And I felt so disappointed in myself because like I am not flexible. I got really scared on rock climbing and only made it halfway. And a spin class, I was like, ooh, I need to work on my cardiovascular
I
strength.
really
Like,
want you to keep doing all three. I'm so
oh,
excited for you.
I love it. I love it. I'm like excited for it. I think those things are great. But I was complaining to him and he was like, I was just disappointed. And he was like, good. Isn't it pretty cool that you have that choice to improve on all those things? Like you have a cool opportunity now and you can make that choice to be like, wow, my cardiovascular strength isn't where I would like it to be. I'm going to choose what great power that I have to increase that cardiovascular strength, or my flexibility is not that wonderful. I'm going to choose, or my fear is heights. I'm going to choose. Like, it's a great power to have that choice, like you were saying, Stephen. Like, and then to be able to use it. Like, it's one thing to like say, I have this power, and then to be like, oh, and then I can apply it and I can use it and I can improve on it. Fantastic. Like, it's a pretty cool thing once you tap into it.
And I think that like it's all about just that first time that you do. And it's something as simple as like you going to those three things, it like, and that being not your norm and just showing up. Like that alone can be such a catalyst for so many other things where, you know, you survived. It was hard, but you survived it and you came out. And so you can do these other things. You can put yourself in these other situations, have uncomfortable conversations, like walk into a room you normally wouldn't, whatever it is. And that's where, like, if we talk to somebody who, you know, a lot of women will be uncomfortable going into like the dumbbell section of the gym or things like that. And it's like, I'm telling you, if you just go in one day, we're going to go and you're going to pick up the 5 pounds and I'll like map out like this is probably where they're going to be like on the rack. Just go and pick them up, do one set of bicep curls, and then you can walk away. And it's like that exposure of like, just go try it. No one's going to like yell at you for being there. And then the next time you get a little bit more comfortable with it. And so I
Yeah.
love that. I'm going to keep bugging you about yoga and rock climbing because that sounds amazing.
It was, I mean, I will say I won't do bunk beds because that's how big my height fear is. Like I won't go to the top of the bunk bed because I'm like, I can't get down. So I did it and it was really scary and I was very sweaty and I did it though. And I will do it again. Like I'm already signed up to do it again. I have gone back to yoga. I'm already signed up for spin class. Like it's good to challenge yourself and to not, and in whatever capacity, nutrition, intentional eating, whatever you want to call it, or physically challenge yourself. Like instead of being like, oh, I wish I could. Like, no, actually you can. Like you could. If you put in a little tiny bit of effort into it, you could do that.
Word. Hey, Steven, you got anything for us to close us out?
Nope. Bye.
So,
He says, and we're done.
and
All right, guys, cool. Well, you know where to reach us. By the time this comes out, we will be a couple of days into the New Year, New Start Challenge. So we keep that enrollment open if you guys are still interested in joining us. We will probably be sold out of the guided coaching spots, I would guess, but there's still standard entry options. So if you guys have any questions about that, just leave any comments or questions in the comment section of the YouTube, and I'll get back to you with that, and we will talk to you guys next week.
Hey.